I first met Wess Daniels in 2007 when we both turned up at Quaker Heritage Days in Berkeley Friends Meeting, where I found myself drawn into conversation with a nest of convergent Quakers. People who had a sense that the gifts of the Quaker insight have been scattered widely amongst all the different branches, but simply adding everything up together and drawing those different strengths together was not going to be enough for us to be adequate to our times. That you had to live within the strengths of each tradition, seeking for how the gospel is to unfold now amongst us. Wess, by that time, was well on his journey from his first encounter with Friends and Evangelical Friends International in Ohio yearly meeting, or in Ohio rather, going out towards Pacific Quakerism, especially Northwest yearly meeting and the California landscape there. Again, always holding the idea or the sense that what he was encountering that was alive amongst those friends was just the tip of the iceberg, and that there was a larger whole to be explored and understood, and that he wanted to keep growing into his understanding of that. So a lively seeker, as well as a finder. He's fetched up at Guilford. He's the, let me see, I get the title right here, the Director of Friends Center and Quaker Studies at Guilford College, where his gifts of pastoral encounter and scholarship, prayer and worship, hands-on living can be exercised in that lively academic community. His exploration of the idea of convergence and what he spoke of as remixing led to his first book, A Convergent Model of Renewal, Remixing the Quaker Tradition in a Participatory Culture. More recently, he's published Resisting Empire, the Book of Revelation as Resistance, which I recommend. In between, I'd like to point out that there was a little, in the early, like the 2020s, there was a little eruption, as the birdwatchers say, of big books about Quaker studies. There was the Oxford Handbook of Quaker Studies and the Cambridge Companion to Quaker Studies, and Wess and Rhiannon Grant, a very interesting British friend, edited The Quaker World, which, more than the other excellent books, includes as its own particular excellency many voices from Latin American and African friends, as well as friends from across the Anglo world. A mixture of theology and history and biography and reflection. It's a good read as well. I recommend it. I like this quotation from his book about Revelation, a book that friends don't often read, but we can fix that. Revelation reminds us that while the darkness will not conquer the light, we have our own role to play in the whole thing. One way in which I believe Revelation can be helpful to us today is to remind us to draw on our strengths, our successes, including those of our predecessors, that's my interpolation, the light that is already at work amongst us and out there as well. We can step out into danger even if the evidence is inconclusive. And I believe that we'll find more light walking around along the way. He's going to speak to us today on the topic, the practice of silence as resistance in the age of attention fracking.
Wes has invited us to listen to this reading from Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3 and verses 12 through 16. So if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and with gratitude in your hearts, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God.
Greetings, friends. It's so good to be with all of you. I am a first-time caller, but long-time listener to New England Yearly Meeting. I have many friends and fellow ministers in our midst that I've had the privilege of knowing in various capacities over the last 25 years of ministry in the Quaker tradition. It's good to be with you, and it's nice to feel familiar and see familiar faces. I bring greetings from Guilford College, and many of you have asked if Guilford is doing okay. Yes, Guilford is doing okay. We are in a much stronger position than we have been in the last few years. I've been telling folks we're now out of the existential crisis phase and now into just the regular crisis, which, as it turns out, is kind of nice. You would get used to existential crisis. And greetings from my home meeting, where I'm a recorded minister, First Friends meeting in Greensboro. They've sent me with a traveling minute that Phil has. And I want to thank Noah and Elizabeth and Phil and Sarah and Brian and Betsy and Neil and Christina and all the folks who have helped bring this about in one way or another. And I've probably missed some folks. And a special nod to Martin Eller-Fitz, who is sitting in the front and is going to hold me accountable to anything I say about students at Guilford. So a big task. As we get started, I want us to begin with a practice of attention. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You could think of it as a little bit of a game if you'd like. A practice of attention is one where we use our attention in unusual ways and notice what happens. The point of the activity this morning is to help ground us in this place with one another and help us see what kinds of attention arise for us from this experience. So for this first practice, and if we have time, we'll do a second one in a little bit. I want to give you the instructions first, and then we will do it together. So the instructions will be to get yourself comfortable, find that comfy spot in your chair, to take a couple deep breaths, put away anything that might be distracting and get out anything that might help you be present. And then I'll kind of walk you through the rest of the steps. So it sounds like everyone did that. So why don't we get ourselves settled in, find that comfy spot in that chair. All right, so I want to have you attend to your current surroundings. Again, I'll give these first and then we'll do it together. So first, I want to ask you to notice the built space, the space at large, and what do you notice about where we're gathered? The second thing to notice will be the technological space in the room. The third will be the humans in the room. And then when we're done with that, and I'll give about a minute for each of those steps, I want you to write down a few things that you noticed, turn to a partner and share something from that. Sound good? I'm gonna try it. And I've got this little fancy bell thing here. I'm gonna try to use it. I've not been able to get it to work, but at 1 minute, I'll ring this. Let me get my watch here. Okay, so first, notice the built space. This whole space at large. What do you notice about where we find ourselves gathered? Yeah, it work. There we go. Well, it kind of worked. The second observation that I want you to do is the technological space. So screens, computers, and any other technologies in the space. Just observe, take it in. Okay, and then the third, I'd like for you to observe the humans. And if there are any more than humans in the space or around us, you can do that as well. But observe who is here with us. Right, now take just about 30 seconds to write down on a piece of paper, if you got something close by, anything that stood out to you, something you noticed, something that came up for you as you were making observations about where we are. All right, and then would you turn to a neighbor and just share something that came up for you, a word or an observation, and each just take a few seconds to share.
Yeah.
Okay, did everybody get a chance to share something? Thank you, friends. Now, in another setting, I would have us all share out some of those things, but we won't do that right now. But if you'd like to share with me later, I would love to hear. Will you join me just in a moment of silence, and then we'll get started with the rest of our presentation. Thank you, friends. But this is a little bit of the outline for today. We did a practice, and then I'm going to kind of cover 3 sub-points, and then we'll do another practice, and then I'll finish up the talk. But looking at the practice of silence, and maybe more broadly, practices of attention in the age of attention fracking. Will you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, the part where I'm on the screen could be shrunk, deleted. That's true. Well, I don't know that me being right there probably. Well, anyways, people at a higher pay grade have this. In the 1920s, psychologist Herman Francis Brandt tried to help Look magazine beat their rival Life magazine by discovering the role attention plays in selling advertising. Through a series of studies, he found the size and placement of ads make a big difference in the attention a consumer pays to it. In his research, he learned the best place to put an ad is at the top right corner of a printed page. Brandt knew this because he invented what became known as the Brandt eye test on the left. If anyone approaches you with a device like that today, go in the other direction. The invention was an analog device that used film and light to track the movements of the eye. In this middle slide, you can see how the lines are essentially the device tracing the eye patterns. and where the person is looking at these different images. And then on the right side, it's a little hard to see, but this is an ad where they used an image of a man and then had the eye tracing all over his person, and it says how a woman looks at a man. So this is them sort of using. Yeah. We will not wade into those waters, but this is how they were using his findings. Look magazine funded this research that eventually became Brandt's dissertation in 1937, which was titled "A Study of Ocular Movements in the Bidimensional Plane and Their Psychological Implications." We really need to vet dissertation titles a little better. That research was then used to develop more effective ways of capturing and monitoring people's attention for advertising. I'm drawing all of this, by the way, from a scholar, D. Graham Burnett. He had a talk at Arizona State University in February. And at the end of the talk, I have a slide that has a way for you to kind of see these notes if you'd like. D. Graham Burnett, a history of science professor at Princeton, calls this the start of the unholy alliance between psychology and Madison Avenue. Next slide, please. Our attention continued to be quantified, traced, and tracked through the interwar period and the Cold War period as well, where the spending power of the military budget was put to work trying to understand human attention. As far back as the 1940s, these vigilance studies aimed to determine how long a human subject could remain vigilant to a screen, ensuring soldiers and pilots monitoring radars could do so for up to 11 or 12 hours a day. Graham Burnett writes, labor in the Cold War was much less about digging holes and laying bricks and in the new control rooms of the big factories and in the monitoring stations of our air defense forces. What labor was still, or sitting perfectly still and monitoring a bunch of dials. Of course, all of this is a very brief historical backdrop that leads us up to and through ads on television and the radio, and eventually on the internet, starting with Google AdSense and then everywhere. And what we today call the digital attention economy, where our attentions are targeted and monetized right through these little devices we carry around with us in our pockets. Next slide, please. All of this science and research has gone into what amounts as an attack on our attention. Graham Burnett and a group of people called the Friends of Attention, and yes, they're referring to us, we friends, when they say that, call this attack on attention human fracking or attention fracking. Here's what they say. The new industrial scale practitioners of human fracking have to pump vast quantities of high volume, high pressure, as in toxic, and I'd add addictive slurry into our faces at the scale of the whole population to drive a bit of biddable attention to the surface. This attack on human attention is now a $15 trillion industry. These companies pump into our eyes and our ears a slurry of short-form videos, games, ads, divisive stories, and extreme versions of reality, all in the hopes of surfacing even tiny bits of our attention that they can use for their bottom line. Companies like Meta, X, Instagram, TikTok, Google, OpenAI, et cetera, are not interested in human flourishing. They're not interested in strengthening our communities or helping us build stronger relationships with the more than human world. They are only interested in one thing: engagement, which is also another military word for armies in conflict. Next slide, please. Former Google strategist James Williams, not to be confused with William James, says this. That starts a little later. He writes, these engagement goals are pretty subhuman goals. No person has these goals for themselves. No one wakes up in the morning and asks, how much time could I possibly spend on social media today? What this means, though, is that there is a deep misalignment between the goals we have for ourselves and the goals our technologies have for us. This seems to me to be a really big deal, and one that nobody talks about nearly enough. We trust these technologies to be a companion system for our lives. We trust them to help us do the things we want to do, to become the people we want to be. Now, before you think I'm going to go on a complete anti-technology screed, which sometimes I am tempted to do, I know that there are good things that come out of technology and these platforms. Technology has its place in expanding perspectives, connection, and our abilities. I, for one, am glad to be vaccinated and to have traveled here safely on a Delta jet while watching Spider-Man and drinking hot coffee. But I also know that these digital technologies and the attention economy are not here to help us flourish. Any flourishing that takes place, as far as I'm concerned, is a byproduct of us bending these systems to work for us. I used to be a strong advocate for technology, but in recent years, I have changed my mind. For one, I see the impact that these platforms and technologies and attention fracking has on my students at Guilford. Many arrive with high levels of anxiety, feelings of loneliness despite being so connected, and often struggle to apply their attention to difficult tasks that require deep patience and focus. I've seen my own ability to have attention follow a similar incapacitation over time, where my ability to focus and be fully present is harder and harder to maintain. And more personally, these companies came from my own family. In 2021, I watched my child's mental health decline to the point that it threatened her life. Over the course of more than a year, in turning our lives upside down to support her, I realized there were much larger forces at play than willpower or some personal discipline. All of this was hard to experience as a family, but the thing that really drove it home for me, I learned after she recovered, was that there were class action lawsuits from parents of other teens who were suing these companies because they had learned that these companies had literally targeted children 12 and 13 with the kinds of information that was harmful. These are not just harmless social experiments. So when I saw the language of attention fracking, I felt that strong language got close to my own experience. This is why I also don't think this is just a matter of us being good enough to keep our phones in our bags or something like that. We are up against powers and principalities of a different scale than humans have ever created or experienced before. These are algorithms of empire. They are powerful because they function like empires, but the casualties and the costs are often hard to see at first. These companies want to use their algorithms to turn us into a quarterly statement or a quarterly earnings statement, without any regard to what they do to our attention, our relationships, our democracy, or our earth. Next slide, please. So what is attention? Just take a second. What comes to mind when I ask you, what is attention to you? What are some words? Okay. Way of loving. Awareness. Concentration. Intention. Focus. Prayer. Persistence. Looking. What was this over here? Tension. Yeah. What we give worth to. Listening. Care. Memory. Listening together, the sort of attention that happens in a collective. The Brent experiment and the military research of attention fracking focuses primarily on one form of attention. And that form of attention, James Williams calls spotlight. It's our immediate capacities for navigating awareness and action toward tasks. It enables us to do what we want to do. Spotlight is a matter of will. And this is the kind of attention that our culture prizes, puts trillions of dollars into. And so it's a wonder that that often becomes kind of the only kind of attention we tend to think about. But you all are ahead of the game in this way and named other ways that attention show up as well. Last night at the hotel, we had a fire alarm go off. And Adria, we were out there and Adria said, you know what's really good? We didn't sleep through the fire alarm. So we need our spotlight. We need the like, oh my gosh, got to get up and got to get out of here. Nothing wrong with that. But there are other forms of attention that are important as well. Starlight is another one that James Williams talks about. He says, our broader capacities for navigating life by the stars of our higher goals and values enables us to be who we want to be. I had a student, I'm going to tell you at the end of the presentation a little bit about my first year seminar class called Boredom as a Superpower. One of my students, they had to do boredom practices every week and journal about them. And so they got to come up with things they thought would be boring and then do them and see what happened. They didn't die. That's what happened. They did not die. They survived boredom. One student in particular, I will always remember this. He decided to have a morning practice for the week where he left his phone on his nightstand for the first half hour he was awake in the morning. And he would just lay in bed and stare at the wall, stare at the ceiling. I'm not suggesting that you try this at home, but he did this and then he reported back. And one of the things he reported back was, the second or the third day that he did this, his mind started to wander to a place of starlight. Didn't use that language, but he started to think about, hey, I'm in college. I made it. And he started to think about the people who helped him to be there and what it took for him to get there. And that came from that letting go and letting his mind wander and letting himself be a little bored. And to me, that's a little bit of that starlight. I asked him, I said, if you hadn't done that practice and you just kind of kept going on the way you were going, when do you think you would have had that thought? When would that have taken place? And we agreed that it could have been next year. We don't know, because you need space. We need space to let those thoughts arise. Next slide, please. A third type of attention is called daylight. Our fundamental capacities, such as reflection, metacognition, reason, and intelligence, that enables us to define our goals and values to begin with. It enables us to do what we want to do. So daylight is that really big picture. And the kind of long work that so many of you are doing, things that you've been working on for a long time. I was thinking about the business meeting today and the work with the Native American communities that have go back 10 or more years. To me, that's that long work that takes time and reflection and continuing to come back and to hang with something even when it's hard. And then the last one that James Williams talks about is Earthlight, which he talks about as an experience of awe and wonder. I love that. Honor sang a song last night during worship where she's saying, I want to be where my feet are. I want to treat the life around me. I want to listen as my heart beats right on time. I want to be where my feet are. It's a song from the Potter's Gate. That attention to the physicality of where we are, our hearts beating, slowing down enough to pay attention to being outside in nature and creation. And then I added, next slide, please. Go ahead, next slide. I added the inward light as a form of attention because to me, obviously James Williams did not write this, but to me, the work of the inward light, our ability to pay attention to that which is eternal, what is outside of ourselves, that we attend to for a different kind of knowledge, a different kind of understanding. One French philosopher, Bernard Stiegler, says this: to pay attention to is essentially to wait. What the attention waits on and for is the infinite of the subject, or the object, the infinite of the object. To me, that's what we're doing in worship, listening for the inward light. Next slide, please. One more. Simone Weil, Catholic mystic, writes, attention taken in its highest degree is the same thing as prayer. Carol Mankus, who is a recorded minister living in the Pacific Northwest, was my predecessor at Camas Friends Church in Washington. She used to say, I can't teach you how to pray, but I can teach you how to pay attention. Healthy and whole attention is critical to our spiritual flourishing. Jesus' teachings were often parables with little subversions packed inside, meant to grab one's attention and open a new perspective. He is also found frequently telling his disciples to stay awake or to wake up. In other words, to look up, look around, watch, and attend. Let's not tell Jesus how telling everyone to stay awake sounds pretty woke these days. But is not staying awake physically, yes, but also spiritually, being alert and mindful, all forms of attention, things that we could have added in when we were talking about what comes up for us when we think of attention. You can start to see attention everywhere, and you can start to see distraction everywhere too. Recently, I've been thinking about the parable of the Good Samaritan, kind of along these lines. Some scholars who wrote the book, The Attention Economy, say that attention is what catalyzes awareness into action. Attention is what catalyzes awareness into action. So I was thinking about the Good Samaritan in that regards. Been curious about what it was about what the Samaritan saw and was able to attend to that led that individual to respond to the person who was harmed, while the priest and the Levite, who were practitioners of attention as spiritual leaders, were unable or unwilling to do. What's going on in their attentions that allow for some to respond and others to, and the text literally says, cross to the other side of the road? What is the connection between attention and action. Next slide, please. And this brings us to Colossians 3 that Christina read for us. Seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on the things that are above, not on things on earth. And then later in the passage, I won't reread it, but the author of Colossians goes into a number of ways in which one might do this: compassion, meekness, forgiving one another, singing psalms, hymns, etc. In the Quaker tradition, we participate in the kinds of practices that bring attention to the things of God. In doing so, our hope is that our desires and our imaginations are shaped by God's desires. Adria talked yesterday about the difference between the Spirit's directions and the world's desires, which names what is going on in this text. We know God's desires as friends to be things like love, sacrifice, care, nonviolence, justice, patience, forgiveness, wisdom, plainness, and on and on. To set our mind on things above is a way of saying, look up, look around, look within. Stay awake to the movement of the Spirit inside and out. Attune your attention to the Spirit's direction. Practice the kinds of things that amplify the love of Christ in your hearts. Our attentions are sacred, and it matters where they are directed and what desires shape them. You all ready to try another practice of attention? Yeah, it was like maybe not. Let's try it anyways. Very same kind of setup as before. But this time, the first step is I want you to look back through your memory, and I want you to remember a time when you poured attention into something, someone, or someplace. So I want you to remember one of those moments. What were you doing? What kinds of attention do you think were at play? What did it feel like to give your attention to that thing? Then we'll stop and make a couple notes. And then the second kind of reflection is closing your eyes again. Remember a time when someone else poured their attention into you. What were you doing? What kinds of attention did they give you? What did it feel like? And then I'll have you open your eyes, write a few notes, and share with a partner. Okay, so you're ready? I'll give you a minute for each of those kind of memories. All right, so the first one. Looking back through your memory, remember a time when you poured attention into something, someone, or someplace. What were you doing? What kinds of attention were at play? And what did it feel like? I'll give you a minute. Okay, take about 15 seconds and write a few notes down. What did you remember? What came up? That helps you to kind of give a little bit of a reset before we do the next one. All right, and then the second one, closing your eyes again. Remember a time when someone else poured their attention into you. What were you doing? What were they doing? What kinds of attention did they give you? And what did it feel like? Okay, take a couple seconds to write down any notes from that. And I'll give you your last instruction. Okay, turn to your neighbor and pick one of those two that you'd like to share with your neighbor, just briefly. What came up? What kinds of attention, etc. You haven't turned to your neighbor. Turn to your neighbor now. Let's gather back together.
Wes? Okay. Wes, can you hear me? No, he can't hear me.
To Kit. Oh.
Wait till Zoom comes back. Wait till Zoom comes back.
I can't hear you, Neil.
Oh, Kit.
Wait till Zoom comes back. 25 seconds or so.
Oh. It just felt holy.
If only I could be in like 100 places at once and hear what you all were sharing. It sounded very, very lively.
Zoom is about
Zoom
6
back?
seconds away. No, 6 seconds.
Okay,
3.
6 seconds. 2, 1,
Here they come.
blast off. Hey, welcome back, Zoomers. Next slide, please.
Oops. There we go.
You don't like when the tech guy says, oops, you never know. Recently, I think I discovered how George Fox might have answered that first question. Remember a time when you poured your attention into something. This past semester, I transformed my introduction to Quakerism class to account for some of the challenges that we're discussing today. And Martin here lived to tell the tale. I think. One of the big changes was, instead of reading the introduction to George Fox's journal, or reading an introduction about George Fox's journal, we actually read some of the journal together. And while the text is challenging, friction is good, especially for our attentions. The students surprised me with how much they liked reading Fox and how much they sort of picked up on his own sort of fieriness and related to that as he's, frustrated with the corruption of his own world. I also noticed for the first time how much the very start of our Quaker tradition and Fox's opening odyssey, if you will, was rooted in long periods of solitude. In opening chapters of his journal, Fox writes that he spent over a year walking the countryside, solitary and alone. This struck me. I'd been reading a book by Carrie Smith called The Wander Society, which is really good, and it's about the sort of the virtues of just wandering. The Quaker origin story as a movement is rooted in this deep attentional practice, like wandering, solitude, prayer. No artificial inputs, no podcasts, no audiobooks, not even Google telling you that you made another wrong turn, which really annoys me. Fox, in the quiet of the day, walked through field and town while he listened and attended to what was around him. He let his mind wander and dream. He prayed and aimed his thoughts towards things above. He heard birds and insects in the fields as he passed. He most certainly heard the laughter and tears of children playing outside their homes. He felt where his feet were, and he learned the sound of his own heartbeats. He listened carefully to and faced the questions of others and those within himself, even those really hard ones of uncertainty that come up when you're really quiet for a really long time. This time of solitude shaped him and led him into serious insights about the importance of both what we give our attention to and who we give our attention to. He wrote in his journal, will you go to the next slide, please? He said, I found that there were two thirsts in me, the one after the creatures to get help and strength there, and the other after the Lord, the creator of his son, Jesus Christ. I saw all the world could do me no good if I had a king's diet, palace, and attendance. All would have been as nothing, for nothing gave me comfort but the Lord by his power. I hear echoes here of Colossians 3. Set your mind on things above, not on the things of the earth. For Fox, what occupies and holds our attention is a spiritual issue. It's a moral issue. Again, he wrote in his journal, next slide, please. About this time, I was sorely exercised in going to their courts to cry for justice, in speaking and writing to judges and justices to do justly. I was warning such as kept public houses for entertainment, that they should not let people have more drink than would do them good. I was testifying against wakes, fairs, May games, sports, plays, and shows which trained up people to vanity and looseness and led them from the fear of God. The day was set forth for holidays when usually the times were when they most dishonored God by these things. Now, if I'm being really honest with you, as a Quaker living in 2026, and one who has never once been accused of being a plain Quaker, I've never been one for these kinds of passages in Fox, which are not particularly rare either. They feel too strict and out of touch with today, especially when I read them with my kind of holiness fundamentalist background that I grew up with. But when I read it this semester, I realized something different. This is not about personal piety, but the kinds of practices that form us, that train us, that captivate our attention. Fox saw the participation in things as problematic because of a deep conviction that came out of his own solitude. What captures our attention is what forms us. And what forms us should be what aligns most closely with what and who we value. When he uses words like vanity and looseness, he uses them differently than we do today. He's using them as broader concepts to talk about the kinds of habits and activities that fill people's time and attention. One way to think about these activities is as empty spectacles, rather than having the kind of deep spiritual substance that Fox and early friends longed for. What are the empty spectacles that preoccupy us today? Fox saw then how we see now that the attention of his generation was under attack. Algorithms of empire come in many forms through technologies aimed to scrape our minds of data, to sell us more ads. Political ceremonies and sanctioned holidays meant to distract us or create narratives that cover over truth. Official liturgies meant to extract us from the present moment and the suffering of others so we might remain disengaged. Whatever the tactic, empire has always found ways to undermine our attention. Fox saw the religion of empire of his time forming people in a way that led them away from God. I think that is why out of this come a whole set of practices that form the core of our tradition, based in shaping our hearts, our minds, and our spirits in ways that strengthen our attention and direct it back towards that second thirst that Fox talked about, the one focused on the power of God. Because ours is a movement deeply rooted in attention practices, we must consider the ways in which we need to creatively resist the attention frackers. The fracking leaves all of us, and especially friends' practices, vulnerable. The more our attention comes under attack, the harder it is for us to sustain the kinds of practices that make us go. Erosion of attention elsewhere in our lives affects attention within ourselves and our meetings. A weakened ability to attend in our discernment and adjudicate between moral decisions will have larger consequences on all our communities. While vulnerable, our manner of worship also enables us to collectively build our attentional capacities. If these practices were born out of solitude, wandering, prayer, and let's face it, boredom, they are for us a kind of superpower today. Next slide, please. Years ago, I came across this quote from James Allison, who's a queer Catholic priest, who really opened up this idea for me theologically. He says, when people tell me that they find Mass boring, I want to say to them, it's supposed to be boring, or at least seriously underwhelming. It's a long-term, I just like this quote because I wish one of us would have said it first, but it's a long-term education in becoming unexcited, since only that will enable us to dwell in a quiet bliss which doesn't abstract from our present or our surroundings or our neighbor, but which increases our attention, our presence, and our appreciation for what is around us. Just as an aside, this quote is one of the places that dovetails into my Pendle Hill pamphlet that came out last week, where I talk more about different liturgies of resistance and pick up on this. Okay. Commercial over, back to this. I love the way he reframes the power of boredom as a long-term education and becoming unexcited so that we can be present to the suffering of our neighbors around us. There is so much that distances us and distracts us from the suffering, I mean, frankly, from ourselves, let alone suffering of our neighbors. And there is a kind of liturgy, a kind of worship that can undo that, that can bring us back into the present. And that is what friends practice in our waiting worship as we listen for the inward teacher. The very nature of it being boring in some aspect is part of its spiritual and attentional power. Silence is a liturgy of resistance, an attentional practice that is core to our tradition, especially in this time we find ourselves today. Not only does embracing this allow us to be shaped in ways that resist empire and create refuges for all those harmed by empire, but it brings us closer to the wisdom of Fox and early friends. Using a broad definition of silence that includes worship in the way that we think of it as friends, but also that includes practices and exercises like meditation and contemplation, things that quiet the mind, the heart, the breath, the kinds of things that enable us to actually practice what we might think of as silence, is the way that I sort of approach this word silence or practice of silence. These are the kinds of practices that draw out attention into love, friendship, goodness, complexity, bring us in contact with the more than human world, where we are, and helps us to listen. So let me go to the next slide and then tell you a few of the ways that I think silence is a practice of resistance. The practice of silence helps us resist dislocation from our physical world and our emotional world. Silence is a practice of checking in rather than checking out. You check in with God. You check in with yourself, your community, the creation around us, and you listen to what is said. The practice of silence helps us resist speed and efficiency as the purpose of all of human life. The push for efficiency, productivity, and ego reactivity are not only loud to us, but fly in the face of Quaker logic that is discerning, deliberate, honest, humble, and tender. One is rooted in the self-reinforcing logic of technology. The other is rooted in a vision of gospel order. Doug Gwynn writes, "The wisdom of God revealed through our silent waiting together is the anti-intelligence. It sees what surveillance cannot detect, what torture cannot extract, what big data can never amass. It discerns the thoughts and intentions of the heart, and before him no creature is hidden, but all are all are naked and laid bare." The practice of silence unifies. It resists the antagonisms and divisions of the algorithms of empire. It rejects the us versus them that comes with empire, but also these algorithms. In communal silence, we are able to work together to dissolve categories of us and them, friend and enemy, because at any moment, I may be faced with the realization that God is not just speaking through me. God may be speaking through my enemy. God might be speaking through the other. Communal silence is a humanizing process. The practice of silence is participatory. It helps us reject simply being a consumer. When I am silent, I give space for something within me to be born, an idea, a spark, an image, an action. A true answer to the query, "What canst thou say?" arises in silence. Silence enables us to quiet our bodies, our minds, and our breath in a way that we're able to let our minds go, to begin to make the kinds of connections and to hear something from beyond ourselves. Finally, silence enables us to hear the voice of the inward teacher, which fills us with life. It enables us to be shaped by different desires than the ones of empire. Tell me later. Tell me later. It'll be too distracting now. It is here in the encounter with God that we find who we are and what wisdom is being revealed to us. We return again to the center where Christ can lead us. If fracking empties us, silence fills us back up. Will you go to the next slide, please? We're almost there. Okay, so what? So why tell you all of this? I want to leave you with a picture of what I think may be a direction or a possibility. What I imagine is creating and protecting spaces where practice building our attentional capacities and where they are allowed to flourish is a kind of sanctuary. So this is from the book Intensity, Friends of Attention. So they talk about an attention sanctuary as both a shelter and a refuge, as well as a playground and laboratory. To best realize this kind of space, a sanctuary must foster two conditions: freedom from the forces poised to exploit and compromise our attention, and freedom to explore, experiment, and play with practices of attention. So I want to end with a couple very short stories, but a couple examples. This past year, I taught two classes at Guilford. One was called The Practice of Silence, and the other one was this class, Boredom as a Superpower. I'm going to tell you about the practice of silence first and then end with the other one because the other one's a little bit more funny. Then that's a good place to end, right? For the Practice of Silence class, the setup was simple. We meet weekly to read science and spirituality related to science or silence. And then we practice it together in class. And we start the semester off, I have mostly non-Quaker students in my class. We start with, a couple minutes of silence. And then over the course of the semester, the silence gets longer. We're building our capacity to do it. In that class, the goal was to see how a prolonged practice of silence over a semester might impact students' emotional and physical or psychological well-being, as well as their focus and ability to do deeper, more focused, more reflective work while resisting distraction. Part of their practice was to be able to keep a weekly silence journal where they do it on their own and then reflect back on what worked, what was hard, etc. You'll notice some overlap in how I do my assignments. Next slide, please. Go to the next slide. Okay, so this is one of my classes, a Practice of Silence class, actually from a couple years ago. Again, we used a broad understanding of silence. So we went birdie. If you're thinking about practices that are slow, deliberate, kind of unexciting, especially for like 18 and 19-year-olds, telling them we're going birding was like, what? And it's one of their most favorite activities by the end of the semester, because you are slowing down, connecting with nature. And this is Jim Hood, second in the middle there. I know some of you know Jim Hood, Quaker, Guilfordian, yada, yada. Also, kind of a Renaissance person. He takes us birding. So he took us out to a place where we found a nest of owls, and it was very magical. So we would do things like birding, walking in the woods, looking for bugs, studying the plants, looking at the trees, just finding different ways to slow down without distraction and be present. Next slide, please. Here's what one of my students, Ella, said as she commented on the class. That's me in a Tyvek suit. I don't normally wear a Tyvek suit. We were one of our attention practices last year was building a boat in the quad. So we were doing some proxy that day. Anyways, Ella says this. I enjoyed trying out different ways of practicing and thinking about silence. I am proud to say I consistently practice silence at the beginning and end of my day and routinely look for opportunities to be rather than do. I learned during this class to think of silence as a practice and a journey rather than a perfect achievement. And that helped me give myself grace for not being able to meet unrealistic expectations. I now think of silence as an exercise. And when I miss a day of exercising, my body doesn't actually decay. It just feels a bit harder to pick it up the next day. The other class, as I mentioned on Boredom, was my attempt to have some fun with all of this while putting the idea of being bored front and center. This was a class for first-year students who were coming into Guilford, and I was trying to help them kind of, get their bearings, where we really intentionally worked to create an attention sanctuary and helped my students get comfortable with being bored. In as much as they were able to get comfortable doing things that made them, feel a little bit bored, I kind of felt like, being comfortable with that would help them throughout their college career. So, some of the things we did in this class. We had a bin that we called the cell phone love boat, and we would together ritually all put our phones into the bin together, and we would say whatever happens at the cell phone love boat stays in the cell phone love boat. We sewed cell phone sleeping bags, so we put our cell phones in before we put them in the love boat. Tried to just keep that kind of a hygienic area. I didn't use a computer or slides. Everything was paper. I gave all of my students a really nice Japanese paper notebook that they could take they could do their reading notes in and do their boredom journal practices in that, so that when we were together in class, we were sitting in a circle. We were usually outside, on Guilford's campus, under, oak trees or out by the lake. And instead of having our conversations mediated between two sets of laptop screens looking at notes, and we were just facing each other. We had notebooks that we could reference or not. And that really transformed the sense of interaction that students had. I mentioned that we did a boredom journal where they kept practices every week and where they would reflect on things that they would do. And that's just a treasure trove of hilarity. If I could package up all of the things that students subjected themselves to, in order to force themselves to be bored. I will tell you a couple of them in a minute. One of my favorite exercises was I had them interview trees in the quad. And if I had a picture of their faces when I told them that they were going to be interviewing trees in the quad, you would, yeah. So they had a half hour too, which was a really long time. I will be making the activity a little shorter next time. But I gave them a list of questions that I wanted them to, as a journalist, interview the tree. So questions like, what is it like to be rooted in one place? What do you notice that I miss? What would you have to tell me about patience? And then invite the tree to ask them questions. Yeah, it was great. It was really great. We made a zine to finish class. So if folks want to see this, I have a couple. I have two, so I can't really give them away. But so they made a zine, and the goal was to write about what they learned during class. Practices, what did they think at the end about this class on boredom? And there's some really wonderful things in here. I'm going to read you two of them to kind of close us out here. One is from Kari, So one of the activities was to try to listen to a song as on repeat as many times as they possibly could. To just, again, I mean, some of it's just to kind of see what happens with our attention when we like try something. And so this is what Kari said. For week 2, I decided to listen to the song Over My Dead Body by Drake 7 times. This activity took about 30 minutes. With each time it played, the song is about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The first 2 or 3 times, it was a vibe because the song is a banger. After that is when the boredom kicked in. It felt like I was listening to the song for 2 hours once I hit the 20-minute mark. Even after I completed the activity, I noticed myself humming the song randomly throughout the day. It was a unique experience, but would I do it again? Absolutely not. That's great. That's exactly what we were looking for. Just try it out, see what happens. Neo, one of the quarterbacks on the football team, writes this. The first practice I did was walking in the woods at night without my phone. Sounds scary, right? But don't worry, I had a flashlight. But surprisingly, I was excited to see what I was going to take from the experience. Instead of being nervous about being out in the woods, I always heard of how beautiful these woods are. I mean, he'd been in college for 3 or 4 weeks, but he'd always heard. So I wanted to view the woods as one of my practices. When I was out there, I realized I like nature and that I like the outdoors. Being out there by myself also showed me that I can be fine by myself in the world and realize I don't need other people or technology to be happy. I would say the woods experience was different, but definitely a blessing in disguise. You can tell I love the class and my students who joined me on that journey. Because our class was the way it was, Neo again said to me, no offense, Wes, but this feels less like a class and more like a community. No offense taken. What I want to invite friends into in the time we have left, which isn't a whole lot, but time we have left and into the future is how do we build sanctuaries like this, attention sanctuaries, where we can really deliberately work at the kinds of practices that help us be human, help us be friends, and to find ways that we can connect with people in the world who need these sanctuaries as well. Thank you, friends.